So let's talk about the week Jimmy Kimmel's career almost evaporated into thin air. I mean, one minute he's the king of late night, the next he's a ghost, his own show pulled from the airwaves. This wasn't just some minor controversy, this was a full-scale corporate rebellion that threatened to permanently silence one of the most powerful voices in television. And it all happened so fast, a dizzying chain reaction of events that started with a tragedy, exploded with a monologue, and ended with a secret showdown behind Disney's locked doors. We all saw the headlines. Jimmy Kimmel suspended. But what you didn't see was the real story, the brutal, high-stakes power plays happening in the background. The story isn't that his show was suspended. The real story is why they were forced to bring it back. It involves the government, a nationwide television blackout, and a demand for what some are calling blood money. To really understand how close Kimmel came to the edge, we have to go back to the moment the fuse was lit. It all revolves around the tragic death of conservative commentator Charlie Kirk and the individual suspected in the case, Tyler Robinson. Now, in the aftermath of such a horrific event, you'd expect a period of mourning, of unity, right? Well, that's not what happened. Instead, the political trenches were dug deeper than ever before, and that's where Jimmy Kimmel steps onto the minefield. He went on his show, Jimmy Kimmel Live, and delivered a monologue that wasn't just a series of jokes. It was a Molotov cocktail thrown directly into the most volatile political debate in the country. He looked into the camera and said, "We hit some new lows over the weekend with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them and doing everything they can to score political points from it." And right there, with that one sentence, the entire landscape of late-night television was set on fire. He didn't just criticize a political viewpoint, he directly linked a specific political movement to a murderer. In his mind, he was calling out hypocrisy. But to millions of people, and more importantly, to some of the most powerful people in media, he had crossed a line that you can never, ever uncross. The backlash wasn't just a few angry tweets. It was immediate, it was organized, and it was absolutely brutal. You see, the outrage machine didn't just come for Kimmel. It came for his bosses at ABC and their parent company, Disney. And the first major shot across the bow came from the United States government itself. The FCC chairman, Brendan Carr, a man whose job it is to regulate the very airwaves Kimmel broadcasts on, came out swinging. He didn't just disagree with the monologue, he described it as, and I'm quoting here, the sickest conduct possible. Think about that. The head of the FCC just called one of America's biggest TV stars sick. He then went on to threaten direct action against ABC and Disney. This wasn't just a threat, it was a declaration of war from a federal agency. Suddenly, this was way bigger than a monologue. It was a potential legal and financial nightmare for Disney. But here's the crazy part. Before Disney could even figure out how to respond to the government, the ground beneath their feet began to crumble. A rebellion was starting not from Washington, D.C., but from within their own network. Nexstar Media Group, a company you might not have heard of, but one that owns over 200 local TV stations across America, made a stunning announcement. They declared that all of their ABC affiliate stations would preempt Jimmy Kimmel Live for the foreseeable future. In other words, they were instituting a nationwide Kimmel blackout. In over 200 cities, you could turn on ABC at 11:35 p.m. and Jimmy Kimmel would simply not be there. This was an unprecedented move. Local affiliates were openly defying the network, essentially telling Disney, "We will not air your star. We don't care about your contracts. He is too toxic." It was a message sent with the force of a sledgehammer. The financial implications were massive. We're talking millions in lost ad revenue, not just for Kimmel's show, but for the entire late-night block. But just when you thought it couldn't get any worse for Kimmel, another media giant joined the rebellion, and this one came with a list of demands that was nothing short of shocking. Sinclair, the single largest ABC affiliate group in the entire country, released their own statement. and it was a masterclass in public pressure. First, they condemned Jimmy's comments, which was expected, but then they laid out their terms for his return. They demanded that Jimmy Kimmel, quote, issue a direct apology to the Kirk family. That's not all. They also demanded that Jimmy Kimmel make a meaningful personal donation to the Kirk family and Turning Point USA. Let that sink in. A broadcast partner was demanding that a host not only apologize, but pay money to a political organization he had just fiercely criticized. It was a demand for public repentance and a financial penalty. Sinclair then announced they too would be pulling Jimmy Kimmel Live from all their stations until their demands were met. At this point, Jimmy Kimmel's show was effectively off the air in a huge portion of the United States. He was blacklisted by his own partners. ABC and Disney were backed into a corner. They were bleeding money, facing a government threat, and watching their network disintegrate from the inside out. They had no choice. On September 17th, ABC officially confirmed the inevitable. Jimmy Kimmel Live was suspended. Production was halted indefinitely. Jimmy Kimmel was, for all intents and purposes, fired. The show was gone. The lights were out. The silence from his studio was deafening. The message was clear. You can be a star, you can have a massive platform, but you cannot survive a coordinated attack from the government, your own business partners, and a massive political movement all at once. For days, the world wondered if he would ever come back. Was this the end of Jimmy Kimmel? But this is where the story gets really interesting, because what was happening in public was only half the battle. Behind the scenes, a frantic, high-stakes negotiation was taking place inside the executive suites at Disney. You have to understand, Disney was in an impossible position. On one hand, they had a PR catastrophe. Their affiliates were in open revolt, advertisers were likely getting nervous, and the FCC was breathing down their neck. The easy thing to do would be to cut Kimmel loose, issue a corporate apology, and move on. It's what corporations do. They cut their losses. But on the other hand, they had Jimmy Kimmel. He's not just a host, he's an institution. He's a massive asset worth hundreds of millions of dollars to their company. Firing him would set a dangerous precedent. It would mean that any host could be taken off the air by a coordinated political pressure campaign. It would be a surrender. It would be telling the world that their programming decisions are made by outside groups, not by them. And for a behemoth like Disney, showing that kind of weakness is simply not an option. So, what did they do? The official statement tells us they spent the next few days having thoughtful conversations with Jimmy. I mean, can you just imagine what those thoughtful conversations were like? I bet they were anything but. This was a battle of leverage. Kimmel's team was likely arguing that he was just doing what he's always done, edgy political comedy. They'd argue that caving to Sinclair's demands for a donation would be an unthinkable breach of creative and personal freedom. Meanwhile, Disney's lawyers were probably showing him spreadsheets of the money they were losing every single night his show was dark. They were likely explaining the very real threat of FCC fines or further affiliate defections. It was a standoff between a creative giant and a corporate one. And while all this was happening, let's not forget Jimmy's own public statement, the one he made on Instagram before the monologue that got him suspended. On September 10th, he wrote, "Instead of the angry finger-pointing, can we just for one day agree that it is horrible and monstrous to shoot another human? On behalf of my family, we send love to the Kirks." This earlier statement shows a completely different side of him. It was a plea for empathy and unity. It's the key to understanding the whole mess, in my opinion. He was clearly torn between his human response to a tragedy and his professional instinct as a comedian to call out what he saw as political opportunism. That conflict is what bled to the explosion. He tried to be both a unifying voice and a divisive satirist in the span of a few days, and it blew up in his face. So, after days of these intense, thoughtful conversations, a decision was reached. On September 22nd, the Walt Disney Company released a new statement. It was a carefully worded piece of corporate poetry. They announced that Jimmy Kimmel Live would return to the air on September 23rd. The suspension was over. He was back. but you have to read between the lines of their explanation to understand what really happened. They said, "Last Wednesday, we made the decision to suspend production on the show to avoid further inflaming a tense situation at an emotional moment for our country. It is a decision we made because we felt some of the comments were ill-timed and thus insensitive." Notice what they did there. They didn't say the comments were wrong. They didn't say he lied. They said they were ill-timed and insensitive. That's not an apology. It's a strategic retreat. It's corporate speak for, okay, maybe he shouldn't have said it right then, but we're not throwing him under the bus for what he actually said. They gave the critics just enough of a concession to save face while fundamentally standing by their talent. They called his bluff. They called the affiliates' bluff. Disney ultimately decided that the long-term cost of looking weak was greater than the short-term cost of the backlash. They absorbed the hit, weathered the storm, and put their guy back on the air.